it just shows how these people can come up with something with minimum research and think that they are debunking flat Earth just because they repeat some facts they found on Google. And I would ask as well, why do these proofs not include a single measure of curvature on the surface of the Earth?
Debunking flat Earth in 60 seconds or less. We first proved the Earth was a sphere using a literal stick in the ground, so...
Okay, we, the royal we, he wasn't there, and whether or not Eratosthenes existed, that's who he's referring to, who knows whether he was really a person and what he was actually measuring. With pages and pages of the Eratosthenes experiment. And so, of course, every flat earther knows about the Eratosthenes experiment because that was the first piece of information they came across, if they didn't know it already, when trying to find out if anyone had ever actually measured any curvature on the surface of the Earth. So Eratosthenes measured a circumference, the circumference of the path that the sun makes. Now, usually when we draw a circumference, it's on a flat piece of paper from which you can draw a radius to the outside, and you can do some mathematics, and you can calculate the assumed circumference of your circle. Yeah, so that's not really a definition of curvature. It's certainly not a measurement of curvature. It's just an assumption that this guy measured a circumference that you would usually do on a flat surface, and they pretend that it's a circumference of, or the girth of a globe Earth at the equator. The other thing is that this experiment doesn't prove anything because you can get exactly the same results with a local light, and that's what we see. We see shadows of different lengths because we have a local sun. You can find yourself, it's an experiment, you can find yourself, and you just look outside and see where streetlights might be illuminating casting shadows on a series of posts or whatever. Okay, this is observable in our reality. The measuring shadows, that's a pretty thing. And a comment you'll often hear from today's physicists, or theoretical physicists, I should say, is that, well, Eratosthenes was quite close for his time, and even according to today's more accurate measurements, he was not far off. Well, are they measuring any curvature? No, they are just finding more definitive ways to measure the shadows, or measure them in smaller increments, or more accurately.
So it's not hard to understand. Space...
Okay, yeah, I'd agree. It's not hard to understand. But it's very, very difficult to prove.
Looks different to people in the southern and northern hemispheres. I mean, compare the moons. This only makes sense if people in Australia are upside down relative to the northern hemisphere.
Oh, okay, so another simple one to debunk. All you do is put a picture of the moon or anything you like on your ceiling or even on your floor, and you look at it from one side of your flat floor and then from the other side of your flat floor. And simply being on the other side means that you see it from a different perspective. So you certainly do not assume that the only way that you can see this happening is by being on opposite sides of a spherical Earth, or even, as he said, upside down in Australia relative to someone up north. I mean, that's just a ridiculous concept anyway. Not something that anyone can actually prove as happening in reality. It's just part of a concept. All right, on to lunar eclipses.
And what about lunar eclipses? The Earth's shadow is cast onto the moon as a perfect circle. And what about our...
Okay, all right. Well, lunar eclipses, of course, the shadow is assumed to be a globe Earth, but as you'll know, there are certain eclipses where we see the sun and the moon above the horizon at the same time. And so something else is happening up there. And when it comes to modeling this idea that you have a globe, Earth, orbiting a massive sun 93 million miles away and coming between the sun and the moon that's much closer and much smaller, we have illustrations, because we don't have any actual photographs or footage of this, we have illustrations of a globe Earth casting a shadow that tapers off into a cone shape in the distance. Basically, the shadow gets smaller and smaller until it hits the moon at the right time for a lunar eclipse. But in reality, we never see shadows that are smaller than the object casting the shadow. Go and check it outside for yourself on a sunny day. Have a look at the shadow cast by you or a building. You'll see that the shadow is always about the same size as the building, or larger. Of course, the shadow might stretch off into the distance, but you'll never see a shadow actually get smaller. And this also goes against the idea that the sun is massive and it's emitting parallel rays of sunlight. Because if that were the case, then again we should have a very sharp shadow from the Earth that is also in parallel lines. You do not get this cone shape, you should just have this endless shadow that doesn't change in size because you've got the light apparently hitting it in parallel lines. So lunar eclipses are again just looking up at the sky and making assumptions about a presupposed model. They don't prove that the Earth is a sphere in the first place.
Are literal photos of Earth.
Okay, and he called them literal photos of Earth. Shows how little research this guy has done, because if you take that photograph there from the actual NASA website, if that's where it's from, and you play around with the levels, you can see that that Earth is pasted on. And again, you still have to believe that people went to the moon in the first place to get that shot. And you have to believe that it's not possible to do if you didn't want to just do it and pretend that you've been to the moon. And take lots of money for the mission to get there, and then in return deliver a few photographs based on what everyone would assume the Earth would look like anyway. There are so many ways you can debunk that photograph as well, because the same photograph is used in different scenarios. The clouds don't move, everything stays the same. It's just one of those things when you can start looking into the flat Earth and you start looking for real photographs of the Earth from space, you'll think there are loads, but there aren't. The image or the blue marble on the iPhone screens is a composite image, it's CGI. No one has an actual photograph of the entire Earth from space. Simply because no one's ever been that far away. You just can't get to space.
4-stage engine start. 3, 2, 1. Boosters in ignition. And liftoff of Artemis 1. We rise together back to the moon and beyond.
Flat Earthers use GPS.
Well, yeah. Most people do use GPS, and it's done with triangulation from cell phone towers, and it's usually pretty local. Your phone isn't communicating with a satellite hundreds or thousands of miles away. It's simply communicating with the nearest cell phone towers, and if you lose a cell phone signal, you lose your GPS signal.
Because GPS only works because of the satellites orbiting our very spherical Earth.
Okay, another grand assumption there. You could well have satellites up there, but you're also assuming at the same time that having a satellite means that it is orbiting a spherical Earth, when there's nothing to tell you that that's what's actually happening. Admittedly, this is a difficult one to get over. It was one of the last hurdles for me until I researched satellites thoroughly and realized that NASA has been launching balloons into high altitudes for as long as they have been calling them satellites. Echo 1 was the first one, and it was used to transmit and receive radio and TV signals. So there's nothing new there. The technology hasn't changed. NASA is constantly using helium to put balloons up there with exactly the same equipment that you will see dangling from a satellite. So that's what satellites are. Satellites are balloons, but we don't really need them for getting around town using a GPS. Although it might be called a global positioning system, it really is just referencing maybe ground points based on triangulation of local cell towers. There's nothing spherical about using a GPS.
And we can see other planets using telescopes. Why are they spherical but Earth isn't?
Another complete assumption based on the primary assumption made by Copernicus when creating the heliocentric model, not from seeing that or measuring any Earth curve, but simply by shifting the Earth away from being a geocentric model to a heliocentric model. And therefore you have to assume that the Earth is another planet that's going around the Sun with all those other planets. It's just an assumption, a necessary one for the model in order to have a rotating Earth, in order to have night and day in this particular model, because a flat Earth going around the Sun would not experience night and day. And if it flipped over from one side to another, then of course there would be this dramatic change from night and day. But what we have is a smooth transition. And so of course that is defined as being on a spinning spherical Earth. Not because it was ever measured, not because anyone ever saw the Earth from space or saw the solar system from Earth or from another vantage point, simply because that was a necessity for the heliocentric model. And it was just a decision to shift the center of our observations from being geocentric to heliocentric. But nothing that we see in the sky changes. So again, this is, sure, there are planets up there and no one denies that they appear spherical. But what are they? Where are they? How far away are they? And are we one of them? We certainly don't have to assume that, and you wouldn't assume that if you were just looking up at the sky and observing these planets. All right, so that's the end of that one. It took 45 seconds for him to show that he is incapable of doing any research beyond pulling up the first results he finds. In a Google search.
60 seconds.
All right. So he didn't debunk flat Earth. He just proved that the globe is a load of nonsense and that people can only point at the sky. No one's ever measured any curvature. To actually ascertain that we do in fact live on a globe. It was just a bunch of assumptions, and they are being repeated throughout history, and it really has dumbed down the Generation G, I'm afraid. Sad but true. Thank you very much.